Hey everyone, my name is Rooster and welcome back to Mechabellum. In today's video, I want to go through all of the unit modifications that are available in the game. For each and every single unit, I want to go through their techs and tell you guys what I think is the most optimal build for them. At least tell you guys what I believe are the essential techs, and then maybe on which units you have some room to pick and choose different tech upgrades depending on your playstyle and preference. The way this video will work is I'll be going through each and every single unit one by one. The different units will be timestamped down below so that if you are only interested in a certain unit, you can quickly go there now and you don't have to go through the entire video. Also, if you look at the unit modification screen right here, you will see that some of these units don't have a full loadout just yet. Right? For instance, the Wasp right now only has the energy shield tech. The reason why I have done this is that these are the techs I think are absolutely mandatory for these units. And then we're going to go through them and I'll explain where you have some wiggle room, some room to pick between 1, 2, 3, maybe a couple techs even, depending on what you like to play. So, without further ado, let's get into these, starting with the Crawler. Now, on the Crawler, I think that the things that are absolutely mandatory are Impact Drill, Replicate, and Subterranean. Impact Drill is just absolutely needed for those Crawler matchups. Replicate is obviously very good. Also, like if you want to have a Crawler fight, this is going to be amazing. Subterranean, even though it got nerfed quite heavily, I still think it's good, especially with stuff like Melter Spam, where you have that Crawler production tech, and oftentimes the one tech that you will want if it gets to the late game is Subterranean. And then you have some wiggle room. You can either pick Mech Rage or you can pick Acidic Explosion. Out of these, I think Mech Rage is probably the most solid one. If I'm being honest, you probably don't want to end up in a Crawler fight anyway. Like, you can just, you know, build a Crawler counter like a Wraith or a Vulcan or some Arclights, whatever, and just not indulge into that craziness. But if you do want to, then Mech Rage is kind of needed, because if your opponent wants to go for it as well and does run Mech Rage and you don't, you are at a significant disadvantage. But I think, you know, you probably shouldn't be going for that for Crawler fights anyway, so then you can run Acidic Explosion if you want. I have been trying this out. I haven't really clicked it yet, but I haven't had the need to, you know, get Mech Rage on my Crawlers either. So this is kind of one where you have some wiggle room. On the Fangs, not so much to be said. I think these are all mandatory. You only have 5 options anyway. The only thing that you might consider is Ignite over Armor Piercing, or the other way around, but I think Ignite is just strictly better, especially against big units. If you somehow end up in a position where you think, well, I have a lot of Fangs, maybe I can give them range and Ignite, and they will do well against stuff like War Factories or even Fortresses or Melters. AP doesn't do that. So I think Ignite is just a better option here, but you probably don't want to go carry Fang in a lot of games anyway. So yeah, that's the Fang covered. Arclight, I would say range is obviously mandatory. This is pretty much the case on any unit. It's just such a good stat. Charge Shot, I think, is absolutely mandatory too, because one, if you are playing Arclights as your chaff clear, then there may be a point in the game where you have really high level arcs, and it just becomes worth to get that second tech, especially if your opponent is playing some tanky units, which they probably will, and it prevents your Arclight from getting stuck on the tanky units for too long. Right? So any unit they shoot at, they will be doing useful damage rather than shooting, say, 5 shots at a Fortress or Steelballs or even Sledges. And, well, those shots are wasted because the damage is negligible against those units and you're not clearing chaff. So I think it's a really good, good tech. Elite Marksman, I think, is also still good, getting that additional attack damage and a little bit of range. If you want to go carry arc, if you find yourself in a position where carry arc is viable, then you'll be happy to have this tech. And then you basically have a 4th slot where any of these other 3 techs you can fit. You can either go anti-aircraft ammunition if you want to go full carry arc. I don't like running this personally because I think the arcs get kind of overwhelmed if they have to both clear ground units as well as air units. But, you know, the 4th slot is something that you probably won't be teching too often anyway. So you could go for this. It might also prevent your units or your opponents from going heavy into air because they might fear this button. Electromagnetic shot is quite good too, especially against stuff like giants. I have even had games where I'm fighting war factories and EMP comes in clutch because I'm able to disable those pesky war machines. And then armor enhancement is the one I like to run currently because it's so cheap, especially if you like to play some aggro, or even if you don't and you're being pushed by, say, something like Mustang or Fire Badger or anything like Typhoon, something that's low DPS. Armor is really good, especially on leveled arcs. If you don't need the other stuff, it gives you a whole boatload of HP. It'll block a bunch of damage, and it's super cheap, coming in at only 150. I really like this tech right now, so yeah, that would be my loadout. Moving over to Marksman, same thing again. I think range and elite are especially important. Same thing here. If you want to go carry, you're going to need that range. You're going to need that additional bit of damage. I would argue that AA is mandatory as well. This one is a bit of a toss-up. Like, you could probably say that these are the only two mandatory ones, and you can leave AA out. But I think AA is just such a strong tech. It'll make your level 1, even level 1 Marksman useful if they have to shoot at stuff like Wraith or Overlord. Yeah, just such a nice tech to have defensively, I think. And then the last one is up to you, really. I think the most solid one, especially if you don't want to be playing a bunch of aggro, is electromagnetic shot. This allows you to disable stuff and gives you the possibility of beating stuff like melter spam if you can get that lock on, and disable the crawler production and the EMP barrage, which can be especially problematic for any type of comp to deal with. You could run double shot, which kind of is a similar thing. It gives you the option to deal with giants a little bit better, but I think EMP is a little more consistent. And then you can run stuff like assault mode if you like to play aggressive sometimes, or you want to pick up those free unit marksmen, which often come in quite a decent amount of deployments and levels as well. And then this can be a menace in terms of a whole load of HP on the board. Yeah, these are the techs that I would recommend for Marksman. Moving on to Mustang, range, again, mandatory AA. This is also great. Mustang doesn't have the highest of range, and just the option of staying a little bit further from danger, especially when you need your Mustangs to clear AA, is lovely. You get 90% bonus damage to air units, which is huge, especially for, again, a unit like this, which has a very, very rapid attack speed. So these would be mandatory to me. And then the other ones are up to you. I like to run HE just in certain games. Like, all you need your Mustangs to do is chaff clear. You don't want to invest in stuff like a Vulcan or Arcs or Wraith. You have high-level Mustangs. You don't need them to DPS. And you can click this to make them deal with stuff like high-level crawlers, if that is something that you're struggling with. And then finally, I take Missile Interceptor, just in case I get a high deployment drop of free units and I really need to clear missiles and I don't need the Mustangs for anything else. You could also take AP, although I haven't felt the need to click AP in most of my games. If you want to go carry Mustang, then usually the levels are enough. Or you basically, most games will just have to hope that you get something like an improved or advanced firepower control system, which will really, really boost that damage. Sledges, again, range, mandatory. Mech range is very good. Gives them that improved attack interval, which is really nice. Helps them clear a bit better. Helps them DPS. Yeah, if you get something like extended range Sledgehammers offered as a card, then these two techs will often be the two things that you need to make carry sledge work. And then finally, well, you can basically choose. You could do something like this, which is full carry sledge. I don't think it's that amazing, but if you want to go for it, then those are probably the techs that you would want. The AP is a massive increase, 150% damage, which is much higher than on most units for this particular tech. What I like to run is just more classic techs. I like to run field maintenance and I like to run armor enhancement. Field maintenance is really nice against stuff like Stormcallers, It's also great into a mirror matchup if you are up against sledges. If you click this first, it's really cheap and it helps you out-sustain the opponent's sledges, maybe get ahead, get some levels. And then armor obviously is very good against stuff like Mustangs or Typhoons or Vulcans if you happen to be facing those and want to give your sledges some great effective hit points. Stormcaller, I think fire and EMP are mandatory. Fire because, well, shielded fangs are still good, especially in standard, and the only way to deal with them is basically lay down a carpet of fire and hope that the fangs walk through there. And then the other techs that you might want, I like running high explosive as my third, because sometimes you just want to click high explosive rather than fire, so you don't burn your own units, and it is a bit cheaper as well. But that leaves a fourth tech slot open, and honestly here I don't really know what to take. You could take Launcher Overload if you want, but Launcher Overload is one of those techs that you would probably want to run together with range enhancement, because just Overload alone will put them to 140 range, which is simply not enough. So it's a bit of an awkward one here. You could even run AP. I haven't tried this out, but it is a lot of damage. Yeah, the fourth slot is probably something that you don't really want to be teching ever on storms. But yeah, that's what I would recommend. I know some people would run something like this. I don't want to go into carry storm most games because I'm too afraid, I guess, of being intercepted by a war factory. So to prevent that from happening and going into carry storms, I just make it impossible to go carry storm and I do something like this. Steelballs, I think, is not a non-negotiable. Heavy target is awful, and Link is can be okay, but I think it's objectively worse than something like armor. Range and energy absorption are obviously amazing, and then mech div is also really good, especially if you get to spawn some steel balls with, say, the item or through a war factory, then you'll be very happy to have this. Rhino is an interesting one. I only teched Whirlwind. I think Whirlwind is too good not to take because it allows you to chaff clear, which can be a struggle on Rhino if you do not have it. And then you have a whole load of options. You could go for something like Photon Coating, Mech Rage, and say Power Armor if you want to have a classic like Blender type of setup with the ability to go Photon Coating. With Photon Coating being nerfed though and only blocking 30%, I generally opt out of it. And I like to run something like this with the armor enhancement, because the armor enhancement also increases your hit points. So if you think about it, like, it's a similar type deal. Like, you just gain more hit points, so you're tankier. Photon Coating also makes you tankier. It's really cheap as well, so I like to just replace it. And it helps, again, against stuff like Mustangs and Vulcans, that kind of thing. Another option that you might have is that you could run something like Final Blitz if you like to defend using a Boom Rhino. If you like to use some of the free unit drops that you can get to, well, click Boom Rhino and blow some of your enemy's units up, especially like if you are the one defending, it can be quite good. And yeah, I mean, I know some people like wreckage recycling as well. It's super cheap, coming in at only 100. You have a bunch of options here. I am currently running this, but yeah, you can kind of just experiment with what you want. I don't like field maintenance too much. I think it's too expensive, and the other techs that you can get are just better. But, you know, as long as you have Whirlwind, I feel like you can kind of just do what you want on Rhino and see what sticks, see if it fits your playstyle. Hacker, range, obviously. Barrier is great. Skills with the levels, it is a lovely tech. Enhanced control is quite good. I think it's the better one out of the three remaining ones, and can also help you win a hacker mirror matchup if that is something that you might find yourself in. And then you basically have the choice between electromagnetic interference and multi-control. I take electromagnetic interference. I don't tech it often at all. I mean, I don't build hackers that much, but if you happen to be facing something like Assault Marksman and you go down the hacker route and, you know, they keep committing into Assault Marksman, then EMP can be a great way of dealing with it, as it disables the Marksman while you're hacking it, but then as soon as it's hacked, they get back all their techs. For 100, it's really cheap. I don't think multiple control is that amazing, so this is what I prefer to run. Wasps. We have the energy shield. I think that's the one thing that you need, honestly. The best thing for Wasp, generally speaking, is as a air chaff, and energy shield works the same way as for Fang shield. Can really cause problems for stuff like Phoenixes and Marksman. So yeah, that's the one thing that I think is mandatory. Now you have a bunch of options afterwards. You can, I think if you would have to make a choice, then you probably want to have range as on all the other units. And then you also want aerial spec, just in case you somehow find yourself wanting to go for an air battle against opponent's Wasp. It's a bit tricky. I feel like if you are up against Wasps, then the easy way out is always just to go Mustang range AA. That should be winning. But if you want to go for that, then I think AA is mandatory to be able to have a chance in the Wasp off. It can also work as a defense against Overlords and Wraith sometimes. It's a bit of a toss-up, but it can be good. And then you have a last tech available. What you could go for here, like if you want to get spicy and have like the full carry text, then you would go Elite Marksman, just get that last bit of tech to get even more range. But I would advise against trying to go for carry Wasp in the first place, so that's why I like to run Jump Drive. There was a moment where I was just running these two techs to make sure that I was never going carry Wasp at all, and just being annoying and not overcommitting. But having these two available in very specific cases can be good. We move on to Phoenix. Again, the range is an easy one. I think electromagnetic shot is also very good here. So I find it very hard to get rid of it. And then you have a bunch of options. Now, normally speaking, if you like to play standard a lot, I would have advised something like Elite Marksman and Energy Shield. However, with the current state of the game, Fortresses, and especially Fortress AA, is very powerful and very strong. And it makes it kind of unplayable to go for Phoenix. So knowing that, I never commit into carry Phoenix right now. So I took it off. And instead, what I like to run is Jump Drive to be able to maneuver around the board, stay flexible, but also not invest too much into Phoenix. If I have to sell out of them, it's not a big deal. I have only invested 50, and it allows me to protect flanks. It allows me to have a go at trying to get a debuff through the opponent's flanks. Yeah, it allows me to make plays around the map, especially if I'm playing aggro. This is often the only tech that I will be taking. And then just leveling the Phoenix. If I have to sell out of them, then so be it. And then finally, I like to take Charge Shot because I think it's really good against stuff like if you do end up having to fight giants and your opponent is going for AA, or you're trying to defend against stuff like massive Rhinos or Wraith. This will get rid of them quite quickly if they manage to lock on. So yeah, these are the techs that I like to run on my Phoenix right now. And then we move on to Wraith. On the Wraith, again, range, mandatory. And then I would say Degeneration Beam is also mandatory. This tech is super powerful on aggro, but also on defense. If you're trying to slow down the enemy push, plus you deal extra damage, and your opponent deals less damage as well for only 200, that's an amazing deal. It can be really oppressive. It can be really high tempo. And it's just too good not to take. Then you have a bit of a choice to make. Now, you can either go for Floating Artillery Array, but it's not mandatory. Carry Wraith is not necessarily a thing. Most games, the vast majority of games, you will want to just use the Wraith to chaff clear. So you will, at most, be taking something like range and Degeneration Beam. And then a second job that they might have is just being an annoyance, being really tanky, especially if your opponent is relying on stuff like Mustangs only to kill air. Then something like Armor Enhancement or even Field Maintenance or even both can be really tricky to deal with. And that remains true certainly with the free units, and the option of getting like a high level, say a level 3, a level 4 Wraith clicking fuel maintenance or even fuel maintenance and armor enhancement can be a devastating gut shot. So yeah, I would probably run something like this. And if I want to run floating artillery, I would take off the armor because I think field maintenance overall is a little bit better. Yeah. And then Scorpion. I would say that on Scorpion, again, the range is mandatory. I would argue that acid is probably mandatory as well because it's the most reliable way of getting acid on your opponent's board somewhere. Way more reliable than something like the crawler acid, which is the only other option we have right now. And I would say that double shot is mandatory too. That is especially the case considering the barrier attack on Typhoons. The barrier attack on the Typhoons has 10k health per Typhoon. The base Scorpion has 10k damage, slightly over, which means that if you position it well, then the shot will break the shield, and with double shot, the second shot will go through the shield and kill possibly even both Typhoons at the same time. It is just a really nice way of upping your DPS without having to go for something like acid, which doesn't help against stuff like shields. And then finally, your option would be between these three. They're all fine. I like to use siege mode. I haven't detected it at all, I have to say, but I think that having the option to go into a long range fight past just having the range enhancement can be good, especially against stuff like a War Factory or even Melters. If you don't want to do that, you probably... I mean, armor enhancement is good. It's really cheap. And it still increases your hit points by 35%. Field maintenance is quite expensive and it doesn't give bonus HP anymore, so you probably would want to run this. But I find it a bit difficult to play tank Scorp because usually it means that, well, your opponent will have an easier time locking onto them since they will be tanking for your other units. That's the idea. And yeah, I just prefer them seeing as carry units. So I would run something like this. Vulcan, range again. I think Scorch is really good. It allows you to deal with stuff like Steelballs much easier. It allows you to deal with stuff like sledges. Even if they're like low level with armor, this will still do the trick. Incendiary Bomb, I think, is also too good to miss out on. Being able to lay down that fire is a really good way of dealing with stuff like Fangs or whatever in the mid to late game. If you have to, can be a great gut shot. So I would not get rid of this. And then you have a fourth tech slot available. Your options here are Ignite, Best Partner, and Sticky Oil Bomb. Ignite would give you the option to play against big stuff. The only problem I have is that, yes, even if you get the lock onto War Factory, this could be okay. But even a ranged Vulcan will still have less range than a ranged War Factory. So it's a little tricky, which is why I don't run it. Best Partner, I have been running now for a while. I quite like. It gives you, well, basically a whole comp in one go, right? Potentially, well, you need chaff, but your Vulcans are the chaff gear. If you click this button, they will spawn the Marksman. That's your single target DPS, and you're good to go. Can be really powerful, although it may be hard to set up sometimes, as the Vulcans are not that cheap. And that is especially so for non-giant spec units if you cannot unlock this for free or get it for free from the free unit drops. Finally, you could go Sticky Oil Bomb. Some people like to run this. This will ensure that the board is on fire. If Incendiary Bomb is not enough, then the Sticky Oil will add even more missiles to the salvo and make sure that the board is properly on fire. This is near impossible to intercept as well. So yeah, this would just be the build where you want to see the world burn, and burn it will. Moving on to Melter, range shows up yet again. EMP is too good to take off. It's just such a good tech against shields. Mid-late game, having those random missiles hit a carry unit, disabling their tech or even techs can be game-winning. And in Melter matchups, if you're in a mirror, having electromagnetic barrage is essential. Again, disabling the enemy Melter will just guarantee the win. Crawler production is similar. being able to produce those crawlers throughout the game after your chaff has disappeared, being able to create more chaff can be crucial. Distracting opponents' single target DPS, whether that's Melter or Phoenix or Marksman or Scorpion, you name it. Really powerful tech, especially in standard. And then you have a couple options. I would say it's either energy absorption or energy diffraction. I know some people like energy diffraction, but my opinion on this is that it can be an okay gut shot. Let's say if your opponent builds Steelballs and you have nothing to deal with it, then this can deal with it. But if your opponent has time, then the loss of range on your melters will mean that they will simply lose the mirror matchup. And if they get EMP'd, it gets even worse. So I run energy absorption. It's fine against stuff like fortresses if they're up close. If they can get a lock on, then they essentially won't die. This is definitely the case against something like fortresses with rocket punch. It might enable your melters to just tank the rocket punch, heal back up, tank the second one, and then heal back up yet again. So yeah, but I would say the first three are the ones that you definitely want to be running. Fortress. Barrier is very good. Skills with levels. It is the tankiest out of all the barrier attacks. 40k hit points per unit level. Fortress is just such a jack of all trades, able to tank, able to DPS, and you just really help it with the tanking aspect if you can protect your other units with that barrier. And then you have some options again. AA I think is mandatory. It's super cheap. It's the only tech in the game that allows you to actually get rid of snipers without having to kill the front line first. And yeah, it just absolutely demolishes Phoenixes if your opponent wants to go into that. If they already teched range, then this becomes so worth. And it's only a minor investment. Then you have some options. I think Fang production is still quite good. Can be really annoying to deal with for your opponent. For the same reason that the crawler production is on the melters. And then you can click on something like range enhancement. You can click on something like rocket punch. Both of those are fine. I like running range right now because rocket punch sometimes can be a bit bugged and not go onto the targets that you want them to. But yeah, the last two are up to you. You could even run something like range and overload. This one is really up to preference, but this is what I prefer running. And then sometimes I will switch back to this. Second to last unit, the Overlord. On the Overlord, I still believe photon emission is too good. It's the biggest area of photon emission that you can get through your units. Even though it has been nerfed and it is slightly less efficient in terms of the amount of time it lasts than the photon on units like the Rhino or the War Factory, it's still very, very good. Protects against EMP, protects against degen beam if it happens to show up, and just gives you so much more effective tankiness. Mothership, again, a producing tech upgrade, even though it has been nerfed, can be a threat, even if you do not tech it. If your opponents see this, they might get a bit antsy and already preemptively build into something like Mustang to be able to make sure that, they don't get gut shot by the sudden wasps. And if they don't build it, then you have the option to always go for that. Last two techs, you have some choices. You can go for either something like Overlord Artillery or Chin Gun and Jump Drive. This means that you want to play on the line and you want to have that threat of moving your entire army of boats to one side to finish off the game. I personally prefer Carry Boat with Overload and Range Enhancement. This is just so powerful and it makes your Overlord an all-purpose war machine. The amount of DPS it deals means that it'll kill anything big, but because it also fires so quickly, thanks to Launcher Overload, it can clear decently well for itself. And, for those of you that have been playing the game for a while, you will know that we just came out of a boat meta with Carry Boat being played. And it's still strong right now. Very, very powerful, late game composition. Final unit, the biggest one in the game, the War Factory. Here you get a lot of options. You can have a total of 6 tech upgrades, where all of the other units only got 4. What I think is mandatory is, at the bare minimum, range, missile interceptor, Steelball production, and I would argue efficient maintenance as well. Range is, well, self-explanatory, right? It has 110 base. The range puts it close to the range of something like a ranged melter, which would be sitting at 155. It puts it out of the range of something like a Scorpion, which can only get up to 140 without that siege mode that we talked about earlier. And yeah, it just makes sure that it is safe and DPSing like crazy. I mean, just the attack on this thing is a nightmare to deal with. The 4 cannons are absolute monsters. Missile interceptor is very good. It's the most efficient missile interceptor pretty much that we have. It's not that expensive either, only 250 if I recall correctly. Yep. Yeah, like War Factory with missile intercept. If your opponent is spamming missiles or anything of the type, right, you can intercept Overlord shots with this. You can intercept Fortress AA with this. You can intercept EMP barrage with this from the melter. You can intercept Stormcaller shots. Anything that is counted as a missile. Even Rocket Punch, for some of you that might not know, can get intercepted. It is a little tricky, but it can actually get intercepted, as it also counts as a missile in this game. Steelball production, I think it's the best production tech. They got quite heavily nerfed, but the Steelballs are still nice to get in front of the War Factory so that stuff like EMP barrage might miss. You can tech the mechanical division on the Steelballs at some point to create even more chaff. And yeah, it's just a very nice production tech if you do want to go for that. Efficient maintenance, I think, gives you the option to build a War Factory early, say around 4 or 5. Of course, you have to take into account that it does make your other techs more expensive. So if you tech efficient maintenance, you're planning to keep that War Factory on the board without any other techs for at least a couple rounds, or you're planning to build a couple more War Factories even and not teching further either for at least a couple rounds. Now you have a couple other options to go for. I like to run Launcher Overload because it just means you can go carry War Factory the same way that you can get carry boat. The DPS goes through the roof and it starts crushing everything. Obviously, you do lose some range, so it can be worse against stuff like melter boards from your opponent. So you don't need this. Range is the essential tech. And then you can go for something like Photon Coating, but I know some people also like to run Sledgehammer production alongside Steelball. You could maybe run Phoenix, although it is much worse. It's really expensive, and you only produce 5 throughout the course of the game. But take into account that War Factory's one weakness is that it has no good way of dealing with air units. It cannot shoot air units itself, so there is maybe an argument to be made here. Yeah, I would say this, or yeah, going for that Photon Coating if you want to play this up front and want to be able to tank through EMP or acid from your opponent. That's all that I have to say for now. Quite a long video, but I hope that you found some information that you were looking for here. I've been meaning to do this for a while, so here it finally is. If you found this helpful, please do let me know. Give a like. And yeah, if you want to see me playing live, I am on Twitch. Links down below. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, and bye-bye.